Hello and welcome to Fantastic Fights, the podcast about a middle-aged man playing adventure game books out loud on the internet. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is another bonus episode made possible by the generosity of my patrons over at patreon.com/HJDoom. This episode I have the distinct pleasure of thanking a new patron, Hex, for their support. Cheers, Hex. Your contribution to the podcast is deeply appreciated. As well as supporting these bonus episodes, every patron gets access to a small treasure trove of gaming material, including all the game books written by myself and my husband. There's a new one on the way as well. I just hit 300 paragraphs yesterday, which was roughly the number I was aiming for the whole book. It's not quite done yet, but I'm basically almost at the last area of the game, and once that's done there's just a finale to go, which shouldn't be too big. Your patience is appreciated, and I'm going to start the next one as soon as this is finished to make sure this doesn't happen again. But what of this episode? Well, this time we're playing The House on Sentinel Hill, a Lovecraftian horror game book by Plowman, with internal illustrations by Matthew Dewhurst and cover art depicting a house being hit by weird light from the sky by Joseph Kelly. This is Plowman's first gamebook, as far as I can tell, but it's not his first foray into the Cthulhu Mythos, as he's a prolific composer of orchestral music inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft and other writers of weird fiction. I listened to his piece based on the dream quest of unknown Kadath as I wrote the notes for this episode. It sounds like the soundtrack to an unmade film, which is an excellent accompaniment to writing about a horror gamebook. So yeah, check that stuff out as well. I'm a huge fan of Lovecraft and 20th century weird fiction more generally, so I'm very much looking forward to this one. I've been reading Providence by Alan Moore and Jason Burrows recently, so I'm currently quite steeped in Lovecraft-derived media, which is nice. This book was recommended to me by a patron, Ron Paul Kirkley, so I'm delighted to be able to feature it. Let's take a look at the rules. There's a fair amount going on here, but it all makes sense and there's nothing that raises any red flags from a core design point of view, which is always good. You've got 7 stats to play with, which could maybe have been trimmed down a bit, but none of them stand out as being especially unnecessary. And with 586 paragraphs in the book, there's plenty of space to give each stat a chance to shine. You've got dexterity, strength, perception, stealth and combat, all of which begin at 6 and are fairly self-explanatory. You get 6 bonus points to spread around these stats, but they can't go above 8. That's enough to allow you to customise your hero, but without getting into too many knots over it. I'm going to boost combat, perception and stealth to 8 and leave strength and dexterity where they are. Testing stats is a simple 2d6 roll to try and get equal or under your ability score. The dice roll can be modified with positive or negative bonuses. A simple, solid mechanic that's already proven to be effective elsewhere, and I do appreciate that kind of unpretentious design. You also get 2 health stats, health itself, which is a measure of your health, and composure, which is sanity from Call of Cthulhu with the serial numbers filed off. If either of these drops to 0, then it's game over. They both start at 10. One thing I like very much is that as your health drops, your physical stats will start to drop as well. This makes health feel much less abstract. Interestingly, as your I can't believe it's not sanity drops, you'll lose points from stealth and perception, but start to gain points in combat. As your mind breaks, you become more savage and unhinged and thus more dangerous in a fight. I absolutely love this detail. It does such a good job of turning composure into something that doesn't just feel like a second stamina pool, so top marks here from me. Combat is basically the combat system from Fighting Fantasy, which is another good example of not reinventing the wheel if you don't have to. You're only doing 1 damage if you win the round, but with a base health of 10, that makes perfect sense. There's also a system for tracking how many attempts you've made on the book and how well you've done on each attempt by doling out something called Mythos points. When you finally beat the book, you get to check how many Mythos points you've accrued and get a final score. Something I'm also a big fan of in game books. We've got a modest amount of equipment, including a 1922 Chevy, a flashlight, a small amount of cash which is sensibly left unspecified, and a clipping from a newspaper. Our character is called Frank Winston, which doesn't sound especially heroic to me, and also doesn't give you the same blank slate to project yourself onto that most gamebooks have. I think there's an attempt here to represent 1920s society by imagining the character as male, but honestly, if you're doing weird horror, you can let people imagine their own gender, I think. It's not like female reporters weren't a thing in the early 20th century after all, and Frank Winston is a reporter. It could also simply be cleaving to Lovecraftian conventions. Women barely feature in Lovecraft's work, but honestly, if you're going to replicate stuff from Lovecraft, I think his prejudices are the last thing I'd suggest taking from his work. That very small gripe aside, this seems a solid design from a first look, but of course we won't know until we see how it's been implemented. Let's do that right now as we play The House on Sentinel Hill. Prologue. My name is Frank Winston. I'm a journalist, and the tale I'm about to tell you is true. I can barely comprehend what happened to me in that house and beyond. I try to forget every day. Every day I try to hold my mind together. I thought back to that fateful day many weeks prior, that I happened upon the newspaper clipping in the Miskatonic Library archives while researching for my column in the Arkham Gazette. The article was 10 years old. So straight away the writer in me is slightly irked by the changing of the tense from present tense to past tense. He's trying to forget every day. Every day he tries to hold his mind together, and then he thought back to that fateful day. Not the most brilliant writing there, but also not something that I need to dwell on. Nice reference to Arkham to let us know we are definitely in Lovecraft country. The article is presented below. Newport Examiner, October the 5th, 1916. Yesterday evening, Sergeant John O'Mahony of the Newport Police Department was called out on business up north to investigate a series of killings that have shocked the sleepy town of Durham. It has been reported that 3 bodies were discovered by the local Reverend Thomas Down in a house 5 miles west of the town. In his report, Sergeant O'Mahony has stated that the victims were members of the Turn family, who have been residing in the house for 3 years, having recently moved to the locale from Vermont. The locals say they were decent folk, but certainly kept to themselves, with no known grievances with any other local or person known. Further to his investigations, Sergeant O'Mahony has revealed that only 3 of the 4 family members remain accounted for at this time, and a search, possibly a manhunt, is underway to find Edward Turn, the eldest son of 12 years. I'm not sure why he chose to phrase being 12 years old as the eldest son of 12 years. Usually you use that kind of possessive to describe the relationship between people, so that you would say Edward Turn's wife of 4 years, but it's not really specifying Edward Turn's relationship to anyone else in the text. It's just a really odd turn of phrase. At the gruesome scene, Jacob the father, Melissa the mother, and Sarah, the youngest child of 5 years, were all found with a strange puncture wound on their abdomen and very little blood remaining. There was no blood at the scene. The police would not elaborate further on this matter. The police are also looking for a stranger to the town who was seen acting suspiciously the day before the bodies were discovered. He wandered out of town on foot, seemingly dazed and confused, and avoided the locals. He had an unkempt appearance, with some reporting it looked as though he had been in an accident. Thus far he has not presented himself for questioning, and the police would like to eliminate him from their inquiries. The house, which sits atop Sentinel Hill, named for its far-reaching view in all directions, is no stranger to bad tidings. It sat empty for 14 years, due to events in 1899. It was previously the scene of more gruesome murders, which saw a whole generation of a family wiped out by unknown killers. Could it be the same killers returning after a 17-year absence? Professor Albert Peabody of the Miskatonic University doesn't believe so, but his keen interest in the developing field of forensic science has led him to the house. He is aiding the police with their investigation. I think Albert Peabody is someone who's referenced in the Lovecraft stories. I may be misremembering. At his request and by order of the Newport Police Department, the house will not be deemed habitable again. Also, after the initial investigations, Professor Peabody has asked that the house remain standing to preserve the crime scene. Forensic science may take years to mature, but when it does, we would be able to walk back into that building and study the evidence contained within its walls with new perspectives. One day we may discover the truth. I had tried to contact Professor Peabody at the university, but he'd been away on a research trip for years. An old friend of his, Professor George Stein, hadn't heard from him in all that time, but remarked that Albert had initially been obsessed with that old case with the house for a long time, but eventually just lost interest in it, and suggested to all to forget about his own pointless interest in the place. He remarked he was ashamed he wasted so much time on the worthless endeavour. Then one day he just left the university grounds to travel for research. The university wasn't funding his trip, so no one could say where he was. There was no paper trail to follow. I decided to indulge my curiosity and plan a trip to Durham. As I mentioned, I write for the Arkham Gazette, with unsolved mysteries, folklore and local legends being my main interest. My column, What Lies Beneath, was rather popular, and this tale seemed like quite a find. I felt compelled to see this place for myself. How I wish I never had such inclinations or morbid predilections. How I wish I never found that accursed house on Sentinel Hill. So there's the prologue. Does a decent job of setting the scene and really focusing all of our attention on this mysterious house. Can't fault it really. I'd say the writing is a little bit on the amateurish side, but that's not something I'm going to hugely criticise, unless it becomes a real problem later for being able to parse what's going on. Anyway, we start the adventure proper. The year is 1926, September the 23rd. The time is 4:45 p.m. The fading sun casts a grey silhouette across the crumbling road as your Chevrolet bumps and crunches its way through the falling leaves. The multicoloured tree line sways in the early fall breeze, with most of their leaves still clinging on. The roadside thickets and overhanging trees clip the side of your automobile every few feet. You hear cracks and snaps as the twigs that stray too far break off or are snapped under the wheels. The town of Durham must not get many visitors, at least not using this route. The birds are singing, however, with chirps and songs aplenty, seemingly taking no notice of your intrusion. You are thankful, at least, that the area is not silent, for if it weren't for the birdsong, you fancy that this would be slightly foreboding to the outsider. You shrug off those fanciful thoughts and emerge from under the canopy of leaves. The trees thin out and become meadows extending far on both sides of the road. The tall grass sways in some, while others are clearly victims of the harvest, bare and flat. A beaten-up old sign nailed to a thick post reads Durham. Squinting through the glare of the low sun, you see the town up ahead. You enter the town and pull your vehicle into a garage. The sign over the place reads Pete's Fuel Depot. There is a picture of Pete's Fuel Depot. It's really good, actually. Nice kind of pencil drawing, I would say, showing the car and a lovely wooden building, complete with various period-appropriate advertising hoardings. Really nice little bit of work to just draw you into the historical setting. Great stuff. You don't need fuel just yet, you've got more than enough for the time being. You're looking for directions to Sentinel Hill before it gets too late. You had hoped to arrive hours earlier, but took a wrong turn in Kingsport. The garage has just one pump and looks a little run down. The paint is peeling from the wood-panelled walls and there is no sign of any attendant. Stepping out from the automobile, you look up and down the street, thankful for the opportunity to stretch your legs. It's quiet. You spot an elderly lady shuffling on the other side of the road, paying you no heed. There's not another soul around. Do you want to approach the old lady for directions or ignore her and enter the garage? Let's approach the old lady. She will doubtless know much that's gone on in the local area over many years. Be a good source of clues. You take a few steps towards the old lady, which prompts her to stop walking. Good afternoon, ma'am. I was wondering if you could help me. You see, I'm not from around these parts, and... You don't say, answers the woman, cutting you off. Her head is bowed, her heavily lined face remains fixed on the path in front of her feet. But you can see her eyes and heavy brow rise to look at you. What will you ask her? You can choose between asking her the directions to Sentinel Hill or inquire about the town and the absence of people. I'm curious about the town and the absence of people, so that's where I will start. You inquire about the lack of people. She's the only person you've seen. She lifts her head and she looks you up and down. Being a city fella, you must think every place be full of people flapping about and bumping into each other. Not here, lad. People about don't mean they want to be eyeballed by strangers. If it be unsettling for you, how about you get on back to your mobs? She seems indignant and starts to shuffle away, mumbling to herself. You realise she hasn't told you how to get to the hill. You attempt to ask, but she waves you away, saying, You're best leaving it well alone. Now what will you do? Enter the garage, call it a day, and look for lodgings to get a fresh start in the morning, or return to your car and drive on, hoping for a signpost? I will go into the garage, I think, and ask in there. The door to Pete's garage is old and battered looking. The once white paint, cracked and peeling, reveals a dull grey wood beneath. A heavy rusted padlock is attached to the frame of the door. The latch is open and bent out of shape from a countless number of nightly lock-ups. Hello? You call out. No answer. The windows appear to have several years' worth of grime on them, making it impossible to see inside. You step inside, the door creaking all the way, and enter a dusty, dry room. Motes float through the air, illuminated by what slivers of light can make it through the filthy windows. A long counter runs through the centre of the room, dividing it in two. On your side the room is bare. On the other side there's more clutter than your grandmother's attic. Rotting cardboard boxes stand in one corner, stacked precariously and leaning away from the paint-peeled walls. A battered-looking chair sits in the opposite corner, and various knickknacks, car parts, empty bottles, old overalls and pieces of newspaper lie strewn about the rest of the place. The counter is bare, save for a small service bell. So, his writing style, as I say, is a little bit amateurish in some ways, but he's done a great job of putting me right in the setting, a really good command of what the space actually looks like. So that's nice. I've got two options. I can ring the bell for service or decide I won't get any help here. I will ring the bell for service, I think. You ring the bell with the palm of your hand twice. Looking over the counter, you see a door set into the wall on the left. Perhaps the attendant is in there. You're about to ring the bell again when you hear a creak of the front door behind you. You turn and see a heavy-set man, possibly late 50s, standing in the door. He's wearing dirty blue overalls with Pete's written across the breast. Yep. What you be needin', sir? He says, wiping his hand on an oily rag. How do you respond? I'm going to ask him for directions, or I'm going to inquire about the town. We've inquired about the town and not done very well. We do need to find out where this house is, so I will ask him for directions. You ask about the way to Sentinel Hill. Ah, the old hill. House is still up there too. Nasty business that. A blight on the landscape if you ask me. I haven't been up that way in years, and I'm sure it's even worse now. He looks you up and down for a moment, then continues. You a friend of that other chap, him that drives the truck? He asks, his almost persistent smile fading away. Not reading your confused expression, he continues. Another fellow, much older than yourself, mind. He's been up at that house ages now, doing some work or whatever. Mr. Smith. Never did catch his first name. Each time I sees him, he's less friendly again and looking the worse for wear. Still, he's been here and back giving me the business, filling his truck, I mean, so I won't push those that want to be secretive. We've got a choice of replying that we don't know who the man is and asking again for directions, or lying and say the man is a colleague of yours you're due to visit at the house, but you lost the directions he gave. I don't see any necessity to lie at this early stage of the event, so I'm going to tell him the truth. You explained to Pete that you don't know anyone out here and inquire directions because you are curious about the house due to the murders 10 years ago. You some kind of reporter? He asks, suddenly suspicious. No, nothing like that, just interested in the stories. Turns out I'm lying after all. He hesitates before continuing. If you ask me, there's no way, no how some lad went and killed his own family in that way. I heard they were missing stuff, like the insides, eyes and whatnot. A boy does that to his family. Pull the other one. He looks up, clearly thinking hard. I'm sorry, but I can't properly remember. I think you take the left fork for sure, but the path to the house has been overgrown for years, so I don't remember exactly where it was. Most folk that needs help with their vehicles stays on the main roads. You thank him all the same. Looking around the town, evening is fast approaching. It's time you got going on your way. You thank Pete once again for his help and drive away. I'm getting a nice slow burn horror vibe here. Possibly not the best for podcasting purposes, but I'm very much enjoying it because it's doing that thing of just subtly giving you nods that things are not as they might seem, that there's maybe something wrong with the town and something even more wrong with the house, and giving us another mystery. Who is this Mr. Smith? Could it be Professor Peabody? Perhaps. That's kind of cool as well. Adding another layer of intrigue to proceedings. Could it be that Professor Peabody was telling people to ignore the house because he wanted to go there and conduct some specific researches of his own? That is the question. It's almost 6 p.m. as you're rolling slowly through the leaf-strewn road through the woods, keeping an eye out for the house. The evening is fast approaching and the low sun is now obscured by dark clouds. The overhanging trees are in cahoots with the cloud, darkening the evening more as they form a tunnel that envelops the road. You switch on the headlamps to improve visibility and prevent you from missing any telltale signs of the house's whereabouts. The road starts to slope upwards as you enter the hills that stretch across this side of Durham town. A few minutes pass when you arrive at a fork in the road. The trees and brambles are thick, knotted together, as if one wants to strangle the other. Even the electric lights from your car can't penetrate to the other side. Protruding twigs and tree branches scrape off the car every few feet. There's no signpost at the fork. Now, regular listeners will, no doubt, be unsurprised to learn that I've already forgotten what information the guy at Pete's garage gave me about which way to go at the fork. Even if I could remember the information that was given to me, it's a straight left-right decision, and as we all know, when it's a straight left-right decision, the first straight left-right decision, we always go left. Always. So let's hope that left was the right way to go. You take the left fork, the road getting a little bumpier. You soon arrive at another junction. Do you want to continue straight on or turn right? Straight on, I think. I've committed to this decision and I'm going to stick to it. As your car jostles its way down the uneven road, you come to a turn off to the left. You can take this turn or continue straight on. Straight on. This is the path I've chosen. This is the one I'm going to stick to. Like a stand-up comedian in danger of being cancelled, my response is just to double down. The road appears to be in better repair, but before long you start to doubt that this was the correct route to take. The tree line fades to brush, affording you the chance to look around in dimming light. You spot the unmistakable outline of Sentinel Hill, and perched atop the house far off to the left and behind you. You're clearly heading away from it. You curse your choice of direction and make to turn the car around. As you head back, the lateness of the hour and your own tiredness makes you reconsider your actions. You now have a good idea of which way to go and decide that doing so in the morning is the only sane choice. You head back to Durham. There are worse punishments for making a series of ill-considered directional gambits than having to go for a good night's sleep. That is, of course, assuming we get a good night's sleep, which, to be honest, I kind of doubt we will. Back to Durham, you wander around looking for a vacancy sign. You half expect you won't find one given the run of poor luck the end of the trip has taken, but as you reach the town's edge, you spot an available lodging. The landlords are a friendly middle-aged woman and her husband, who are happy to offer lodgings to visitors of Durham for just a few dollars. Apologising for the late hour, you explain your brief visit and the need to get off the road for the night. "You're a sight for sore eyes, young man. We haven't had a lodger in 6 months, she says, taking your coat. You explain that you may not be staying long. After a late bite to eat and a long, tiring and trying day, you fall into an uneasy sleep. That is, until you're suddenly awoken in the middle of the night. What could it be? Your eyes flick open. Flashes of green light fill the room through the window. Green lightning? The window is open, but you were sure it was closed when you retired for the night. Help us! You promised! A distant voice, terrible and raspy. Your heart nearly stops as you dart your eyes about the room. Who's there? Show yourself! You stammer. More flashes of green light pour through the window. You said you would go back. What do you do? Leap out of the bed and search the room for the source of the voice, or try to talk to the strange voice? I feel like this is maybe a dream rather than actually waking up. I'm going to try and talk to the strange voice. This is good stuff. Who's there? You ask, sitting upright in the bed. No answer. Show yourself. Still nothing. You look around the room. There's no feasible location for the speaker to hide. Unless a sudden thought goes to the bed you're in. Do you want to check under the bed or approach the open window? I want to check under the bed. Once that thought's in your head, there's no way of dealing with it without checking. It's like occasionally I've dreamt that there was someone in the house. And even if it's really cold, I have to get up and I have to go and check that there's no one in the house, because otherwise I'm just going to lie there thinking there's definitely someone in the house. With a sudden lump in your throat at the thought that there may be someone under the bed, you quickly leap out and drop into a crouch to check. Nothing. A final flash of green light pours through the open window. The voice, much fainter now, as though it were travelling on the wind, speaks one last time. Come, Frank, you promised. The speaker knows your name. You approach the window. There is no one on the street. The sky fills again with a flash of the sickly green light. So when it said earlier, a final flash of green light pours through the open window, that was a lie of sorts. In the distance you see a hill, and perched atop the silhouette of the house. Could that be the source of the light? You wait, expecting more. Your heart rate eases, and nothing more is said. It's only then you notice the chill of the air blowing into the room and quickly latch the window closed as one last flash floods the room with a green haze. Is it the last one, though? I mean, you've told me that before. Very much the boy who cried wolf, or green lightning in this case. You turn to get back into bed, but find it gone. The green haze lifts, and you find yourself standing in a long corridor. The floor, the walls, and the ceiling all glint of polished metal, smooth and cold to the touch. At the end of the corridor are 3 markings set into the walls. You see an oval marking in the wall ahead, a circle in the left wall, and a square in the right-hand wall. They are each large enough to be a door, but smooth and flush with the wall, with no obvious way of opening. There is a low thrum in the air. You cannot tell if it's from the floor, the walls, or just the air itself. The air smells of ozone after a lightning storm, so you definitely feel as though we're in a dream. Do we want to call out and see if someone will answer? Examine the circle marking on the left, the square marking on the right, or pass those and examine the oval marking at the end of the corridor? I think I'm going to go straight to the oval marking. When in doubt, try to keep moving. As you take a few steps forward, the reverberation of your footsteps echoes strangely about the corridor. You reach out to touch the edge of the shape, and as you do, the wall opens before you. It is a door. In one swift motion, it sweeps aside to reveal a chamber on the other side. The chamber is undefined, blurred. Stepping through, you find yourself standing on uneven rocky ground. The door closes silently behind you. Ahead, You see 100 black stone needle-like structures rising from the rocky ground against a starry sky. A faint green light shines in place of a sun, illuminating the strange landscape just enough for you to see the vista before you. Suddenly you're caught gasping for breath. You immediately fall to your knees, clawing at your throat. Your eyes bulge out of your head, your skin cracks and splits. Your vision blurs as something, a shape, a thing, lands silently in front of you. Make a hard 2d6 plus 1 composure check. So my composure is 10, and I roll 2 dice and add 1. I get a 6, plus 1 is 7, that is fine. Failure would lose me a point of composure. Record in your investigator journal that you dreamt of an alien landscape and suffocated in a vacuum. Plus 4 mythos points. Mythos points now 4. Then you wake up. You awake not in the bed, but on the floor between the bed and the window. You feel tired, as though you haven't really slept at all. You know you dreamt last night, but the memory of it has faded from your mind. Dragging yourself to your feet, you immediately go to the window. It is raining outside. The morning is heavily overcast and grey. Still, with your mind made up, you get dressed and prepare for your journey to the house. You do remember seeing flashes of green light, that much you recall. And you strongly believe that wasn't part of any dream. Once downstairs, you casually ask the landlady if she saw anything odd last night, or lightning, but she reports nothing, giving you a quizzical look. You get your automobile checked over at Pete's fuel depot, as you do not want to have any further trouble in the rain. After some small talk and further confirmation that nothing was seen last night, you drive on, satisfied with the condition of your vehicle. The rain is heavy at times, lessens, then returns with a vengeance. The road is muddy and bumpy. There's enough daylight to afford you a glimpse of the hill every 100 or so feet through a weakened tree line. Directions or not, finding the house in the day is a far easier task than last night proved. You arrive at the track that leads to the house, and suddenly recall that strange voice from last night, an echo of a nightmare. Refusing to let your imagination get the better of you, you take a deep breath and exit your vehicle. You turn your collar up against the rain and step through the tree line. You head up the track to the house. A grey atmosphere of menace and unsettling events. The track leads steadily upwards, twisting and turning through the blighted landscape. A tunnel of dead trees looms on either side of the trail. Despite the dull morning, you're immediately drawn to the site between the two twisted grey trees directly ahead of you. The house. Though the house stands atop the hill, the thickly knotted tree branches and dense lifeless briars lend the area almost complete privacy and inaccessibility, save for this one track you followed. The grey, mottled wood panelling of the house seeps into the skyline behind, making the house look undefined, as though it were willing its surroundings to shadow it and hide it away. Each of the downstairs windows are boarded up, with the upper floor windows in various states of disrepair. The attic window, top and centre, is the only fully intact window you can see. The front door also looks intact, though the porch is littered with loose timber wood panels, twigs and other woodland debris. There is no sign at all of living vegetation. Dead, crumbling creeper vines cling to the outer walls like grey varicose veins running upwards to the thatched roof. The roof tiles appear to be intact on this side, from what little visibility you're afforded from the ground. I love that detail about the creeper vines like grey varicose veins. I really like that. There is a picture of the house. It's another great bit of work, actually. Really giving you a sense of how oppressively the trees hem in from every side and how dilapidated it is, with the eye being drawn to the attic window that's basically right in the centre of the frame. Nice bit of work. The rain continues to beat down as you head up the porch steps, taking care not to trip over the myriad loose branches littering the way. Thankful for the shelter, you stop to take a breath. Long streams of water run down each side of the porch and batter the muddy ground. Check your investigator's journal. Have you recorded you have been invited to the house? You must turn to the reference noted with that entry now. So the investigator's journal functioning very much like keywords, but in a slightly more elaborate fashion that I think really suits the style of the book. If you have recorded you were warned to leave the house alone, you can turn to that reference noted with that entry. If you don't have either of these references, you must choose one of the following: knocking on the door, trying the door, or heading around the side of the house to look for another way in. Well, I think we will knock on the door as a starter. When in doubt, always try and behave normally. Good advice for life. The door has a rusted metal knocker in its centre. You knock on the door and wait. After a few moments you knock again. "Hello? Anyone there?" you call out after you feel enough time has passed. You're about to try again when suddenly the door opens a crack and a man's face appears. "Yes?" he asks. "Sorry to bother you, sir. Frank Winston. I write for the Arkham Gazette, and—" "Arkham? Arkham, you say? You're from that blasted university, aren't you?" You're about to protest and deny it when the door is slammed shut. University? Miskatonic? Could this be Professor Peabody from the newspaper article? I mean, he didn't mention Miskatonic University, but yeah, hey-ho. Did he come back to the house? You call out his name and add that you just want to talk. You're not far into trying to explain yourself when the door is fully opened. He looks around late 50s, about 5'5" in height and unshaven. He's a little man. Balding at the crown of his head, his remaining grey hair is a little long and unkempt. "Yes, I'm Professor Peabody. Best you come in then, Frank from Arkham." You get a sudden rush of excitement and step over the threshold. "Thank you very much, Professor," you say, looking around the dark hallway ahead. The main staircase runs up on the right-hand side, and the hall ends in a door with another door on the right at the foot of the stairs. "Up the stairs, lad. Save me some effort." You move to head upstairs. You turn and start to take the stairs when suddenly you get a sharp pain in your back. The professor has stuck a syringe in you when your back was turned. You let out a cry while trying to reach back and pull it out. "What on earth?" you shout, confused. The professor stands back, emotionless as your vision blurs. You fall to your knees, then black out. What devilish business is this? Oh, very excited. Flashes of green light pierce your vision. A pulsing thrum sends pains through your head. You try and open your eyes, but all you see is a blur, and then a flash of green forces them shut again. You hear a cry. "It's working!" It sounds distant and drawn out. You fade in and out of consciousness. In your weakened state you think you hear a terrible scream. Then there's a sudden silence. When you fully awake, you're lying on the floor. Your hands and feet have been tied, but you notice your bonds have been cut. You push yourself up to a sitting position. It appears you are in the attic. It is dark, with only one grainy window for a light source down at the far end facing you. The rain beats noisily on the roof above. Standing in the middle of the attic floor is a strange metal device about 4 feet tall. It is a pillar of polished metal that glints in the dim light of the attic, and like tentacles, many copper wires snake their way from openings in the device, running across the floor and disappearing into the walls. A perfect sphere of the same polished metal sits atop the device, set partway into the base. In an almost perfect circle 3 feet around the device lies a ring of dead animals, everything from rats, mice, fleas, beetles and centipedes. Some look fresher than others. Possibility of a bad smell is masked instead with the odour of chlorine bleach. What you see just beyond the device sends you into a mild shock. The professor is lying on the floor, his body twisted at the middle, while his lower half is facing almost entirely the wrong direction. Blood runs down the seams of the floorboards. His eyes are wide open, frozen in terror. Make a very hard 2d6 plus 2 composure check. If you fail, lose 2 composure. If you pass, lose 1 composure. So 2d6. 4 add 2 is 6. I'll lose 1 composure. Composure now 9, which has no effect, although once I get down to 7, it'll start creating a few problems. Something moves in the far corner. Lurking in the darkness is a small, hunched figure. You are about to ask who is there when it speaks first in a strained and raspy voice. You fumble to take out your flashlight. Frank, where are my family? You must go back. How do you know me, you answer, both terrified and overwhelmingly intrigued. Frank, it is me. Edward, you saved me. Did you kill the professor? You ask, your nervousness showing through. Yes, I had to. He planned to stop us. He is working for them. It's then that you notice blood dripping from the serrated edge of the claw at the end of his arm. Edward lurches to one side and starts to shuffle out of the darkness towards you. What do you do? Do you decide this is all too much and flee the house? Use your flashlight to get a better look at the figure, or ask more questions and find out exactly how this could be Edward? I like the idea of asking some more questions, and they all seem like bad plans, which is good horror writing, making you choose between terrible alternatives. That is good horror writing. You said your name was Edward. Edward Turn? Yes, you already know this. You notice a hint of confusion in his voice despite the unnatural qualities it contains. Come out into the light, Edward, if you could, please. He moves forward, allowing more light to fall across his misshapen body. You can see him more clearly now, but can't understand how he could be Edward Turn, for he would be in his 20s, if still alive. His face is that of a boy as reported in the article. He looks gaunt and sickly, and of similar size for a boy that age, but hunched over and slightly twisted. His right foot is turned in and looks to be dead weight dragging behind him. His right arm is elongated, nearly twice the length as his arm should be. And worse still, at the end, in place of the hand, is a hideously engineered prosthetic of a metal claw. The claw is articulated, wired and jointed. It looks jagged and sharp and quite dangerous. His left arm looks normal, at least what you can see of it. What do you want to ask? Do you want to inquire about his claw and other physical changes? Ask him where he's been all this time? Or inquire how come he is still only 12 years old? I'm curious as to how he's remained approximately 12. I am 12, he replies, as puzzled and frustrated as ever. Why does that matter? Go and save my family. You promised me. He reaches into a pocket and retrieves a small diamond-shaped object that glows gently and then moves towards the machine. Edward inserts the diamond-shaped object into a recess on the side of the machine. It begins to hum. He turns some of the dials in frustration. Which is it? Which is it, Frank? He looks up at you with a pleading look in his eyes. What do you need me to do, you ask, horrified at the entire macabre scenario that is playing out before you. He steps back, pointing at the dials. You must know how to activate, like before. His frustration is growing, and it seems it may lead to violence. You don't know how long he will restrain himself. What will you do? Approach the dials and attempt to operate the machine, or tell Edward you have never seen the device before and do not know how to operate it? Apologise if you can hear the sound of building works outside. They've been building outside since at least 1835, as far as I can tell. It's just constant. So I'm going to risk being honest with Edward and telling him that I don't know what the deuce is going on in this situation. When you tell him that you don't know how to use this machine, you are not very surprised by his response. Edward cries out in a rage and slams the floor with his claw. The floorboards splinter and crack as the metal appendage rips through it. Then, faster than you possibly could expect, he comes at you and latches his claw around your arm. He drags you painfully towards the machine. Lose 1 health. Health now 9. And again, no negative effect from losing a single point of health. You must try. You don't believe he means to hurt you, but you plead with him to release your arm, and he does so. You decide it'd be best to try and do as he asks. I'll try. Give me a moment, you plead, as you take a closer look at the device. The metal of the device is smooth and polished. 4 prominent dials are set into the pillar and are etched with a single point each, denoting where they can be adjusted to. Small notches encircle each dial, similar to a dial on a safe, and 1 notch resting directly at the east point is larger than the others. You surmise this could be denoting a 0 position, and there are no other distinguishing marks or numbers. You believe they could be angular degrees based on the number of marks present around each dial. How do you want to set to the first dial? 190, 190, set it to 75. Of those, I'm going to set it to 190 because, much like Spinal Tap, sometimes you just need to go to 11, sometimes you just need to go to 190. Go big or go home, that's my motto. You turn the first dial to what you would believe to be 190 degrees. How do you want to turn the second dial? We've got 45, 121 and 37. We're going for the maximum again. But I feel as though something is going to happen on the basis of this. You turn the second dial to what you would believe to be 121 degrees. What about the third one? 90 or 47? 90, please. Better not have to have written this down. Where do we go? 190. I'm going to write this down. 190. Was it 121? About that. Third dial. We will set it to 100. You set the fourth dial to 100 degrees and step back from the device. Suddenly, a bright flash of green light shoots upward from the sphere atop the machine. A low thrum pulses in the air, and the light flickers slowly at first and then faster and faster until it becomes a solid beam. You back away, not knowing what to expect. Edward stares intently at the beam of light. "Yes," he cries excitedly. "You did it!" The sphere starts to tilt, sending the beam downwards, coming to rest parallel with the floor. When it strikes the attic wall, it seems to form what you can only describe as a doorway. A bright orange light penetrates from the other side of the portal, creating a haze that competes with the eerie glow from the device. "Go now," Edward cries. "Go before it is too late." Equal part terrified and fascinated, you step up to the shimmering doorway. The thrum of the machine pulses through your head. "Now!" Edward cries from behind you. You consider the possibility of dashing to the attic stairs and getting as far away from this nightmare as you can, but before you can, Edward loses patience and pushes you through. You stumble into the portal. A quick flash forces your eyes shut, and then you open them again as you emerge on the other side. A searing heat incinerates you instantly. Your calculations were wrong. You have emerged on the surface of a burning star. Record in your investigative journal, you went through the portal and died instantly on the surface of a sun. -3 mythos points. So we're down to 1 mythos point. So we did come out ahead on mythos points. Your investigation ends here. I don't think I'm going to invoke the Sausagey Finger bookmark rule, although this will be a little bit of a shorter playthrough than we sometimes do. I think this is good enough that I don't want to spoil it more than a bit for you, and secondly, being very much a very recent book from 2022, I do much prefer to err on the side of caution when it comes to the recorded playthrough with the more recent work. I think you've got a really nice teaser. I feel like I've got a really nice teaser for the way the book works. A lot to like early doors. A few issues. As I say, the writing is sometimes a little bit clunky and sometimes just stuff that's a straight up error. But also sometimes the writing is really evocative and really good. So, you win some, you lose some a bit. So that's fine. If there's any kind of warning bell sounding, I'd say it's only really that it feels as though it's being kind of profligate with sections. It doesn't feel very tightly designed. A lot of bits where my instinct would have been maybe to try and confine it and simplify it a little bit, because I'm not sure that the sort of driving up various hills in the New England countryside adds a great deal. Similarly, I'm not convinced that having 4 dials to turn on the machine necessarily adds a great deal, and that potentially adds a huge number of different potential outcomes for the machine at the cost of a lot of sections. So that's maybe something I'll be keeping an eye on as I play through. But I mean, there's 586 sections, so he's clearly just carried on writing until he was done rather than stopping at an arbitrary limit. So it will probably be absolutely fine. Anyway, I am going to go away and play through The House on Sentinel Hill on my own time. Hugely looking forward to it, I have to say. I'll be back for you in just a few seconds with some closing remarks. Tatty bye. I have finished The House on Sentinel Hill, and the very quick review is that I thought it was great with a few small reservations. It's a solidly designed and solidly written book for the most part that broadly follows old school conventions, but with a few nice little twists to give it an identity of its own. I really like it, but I can't talk about why I like it without some fairly major spoilers. I think spoilers are more impactful in horror books, so I'll try and keep it to a minimum, but part of the pleasure of this book is finding stuff out, and I will have to ruin that to an extent. It's one where I would definitely recommend going away and playing it for yourself and then coming back to hear what I have to say. One thing that struck me with House on Sentinel Hill is just how old school it is. Structurally, you've got the prelude to the main action, which is basically the entire section that we played through on the recording, which ends when you successfully traverse the portal in the attic of the house. It's a fairly complicated area, actually, in that there's a lot of hoops you need to jump through before you can actually make your way through the portal and on to the real meat of the book, which is the dark planet of Yuggoth, home to the monstrous Mygo, grotesque aliens from the Cthulhu Mythos. Your goal is very simple. From there, you need to explore the alien city, avoid its many dangers, and find Edward's family and a route home. The second act is very much a dungeon once you look past the horror trappings. It's a single enclosed space which contains everything you need for your quest, along with a large number of terrible traps and deadly denizens. That's something we'll come back to, but first I want to list some of the other old school features of the gamebook so we've got an idea what we're dealing with. The mechanics are classic as well. That's not a criticism. The author knows what works and is wisely not trying to reinvent the wheel. You've got items and keywords rolling under your stats and a combat system straight out of Fighting Fantasy. And I really do wish that more gamebook designers would stick to things that they know work. You've also got a fairly linear design with more or less a single true path through the adventure, lots of instant deaths along the way, and no real opportunity for backtracking. There's plenty of options for exploring the different areas, but you won't find anything experimental or modern in terms of how you approach the gamebook. With such a retro design, it's all about sticking the landing, and for me, Graham Plowman does an excellent job for the most part. This is a testament to what you can accomplish even within the design confines of the mid-80s. If you like that sensibility, which of course I do, this is an excellent book. It's remarkably well executed, and I think it's especially strong for a first game book. One of the classic features of those older books is the difficulty level, and that's definitely present here. This is a tough book, Between the fights going mad and the many instant deaths, it's quite the challenge to complete. It took me 7 attempts just to get through the portal that led to the Mygo city, and I genuinely lost count of how many attempts it took me from there to finish the whole thing. It was definitely more than 15. I found myself actually creating save points once I was certain I'd fully explored a location, so that I didn't have to go through the entire thing on subsequent playthroughs, and that's something which I think this book would have benefited from providing some mechanical support for. And it's got me thinking about how you might go about doing difficult books in a fair way that doesn't involve just a huge amount of repetition. Something I need to think about at some length, I think, before I start work on my next book. Here, the difficulty never felt especially oppressive, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that the difficulty fits with the horror vibe. It's a very different experience to hard books where you're supposed to be some kind of hardened adventurer, and it's a great example of how the affordances of the protagonist matter to a game book. Things that would be frustrating in a superhero game book feel appropriate for a more everyman character. The second element is the book is crammed with options right from the start. The encounters are richly designed, and even though there's a fair amount of extraneous material, that extraneous material that doesn't really go anywhere means that it takes many iterations to feel like you've actually explored all the options. The portal that finished me off in the recorded playthrough has at least 4 outcomes, for example. 2 obvious instant deaths, the right outcome, and something that feels like the right outcome, but which is actually a cunningly designed instant death. I always felt like I was making progress, and I always felt like I had opportunity to explore new things on every playthrough, at least until I got fairly deep into the book. At the same time, even though the encounters are richly designed, there's not an overwhelming amount of space to get through. Despite the book weighing in at a chunky 585 sections, the fact that the book is so profligate with sections and that the environment has so many different options within it, it means that it's actually possible to conceptualize the geography of the alien city in your head. At no point did I feel completely overwhelmed by the layout, and that is a tremendous thing to be able to deliver. I think in absolute terms the difficulty might have been profitably knocked down a notch or 2. The one thing that did start to wear a bit thin was the random rolls that either led to death or just made things much more challenging. It feels like a lot on top of trying to make sure you're making the right decisions as well. Victoria Hancock's Night Shift did a better job mechanically for my money, but it's honestly a small gripe, and I like rolling dice enough that it mostly didn't bother me. You've always got the option to cheat as well. If we're talking about the dice part of the gamebook, I think there's actually a good balance between all the various different systems. The stats all get a chance to shine. If I was nitpicking, I might say that strength and dexterity could probably have been combined into one physical stat, but stealth and perception are particularly well used. Stealth is especially nice to see because sneaking away from monsters helps remind you that you're not some deadly fighter. You're an ordinary human who might be well advised to avoid fisticuffs with the forces of darkness where possible. Combat is present but used fairly sparingly. I didn't get into a single fight until about my 6th playthrough, and that's nice, not least because it creates a good thematic contrast between the opening of the book, which is broadly set in the familiar world, and those sequences on an alien planet filled with danger. Combat often sits awkwardly with horror books, but draining you of your precious health does create tension, and it's something that's an easy way to create drama, and sufficiently easy that it's hard to resist using it. I mean, I certainly couldn't resist using it when I did my horror game book, so I'm not going to criticise anyone else for making the exact same choice I did. Speaking of draining things, the way health and composure work is probably the best formal design in the game book. I absolutely love how the two interact to create a very different feeling for losing a point of each stat. As your health drains, you get physically weaker, but as your composure drains, you get more and more savage and more dangerous. This is a fabulous way to differentiate what would otherwise be 2 stamina bars, and is probably the system I'm most likely to pinch for a future project. Composure also does the Call of Cthulhu sanity thing, where the more composure you lose, the more likely you are to lose more. In my playthroughs, it wasn't generally the thing that finished me off, but if you get unlucky on a couple of early composure checks, it's more than possible for the whole thing to snowball into rabid insanity. Much like deciding to have a pint with lunch sometimes leads to waking up in a hedge 12 hours later with a traffic cone on your head. Sometimes stuff just gets out of hand from an early stage. There's a nice little twist with the keywords as well, and it's one that's sufficiently good I'm slightly annoyed I don't have time to go back to my current gamebook and make changes to reflect it. Usually with keywords you choose a single word and make it slightly arbitrary to obfuscate the thing in the gamebook that it's pointing to, so that when the text comes to check whether you got into a fist fight with a nun earlier in the story, the keyword is something neutral like magenta, so you don't end up revealing that there's the option to fist fight a nun if you haven't already found it. In The House on Sentinel Hill, the keywords and some objects are in the form of journal entries that explicitly reference themselves. Say you would have a keyword that says, I lost a fist fight with a nun, which may have one or more paragraph numbers associated with it, which the book will instruct you to turn to when the keyword triggers. Turns out, getting players to explicitly write down things that have happened makes it easier to remember the things that have happened, and especially in a gamebook with a lot of keywords like this, it turns out that's a really good idea. You do lose something by having the text let you know about things that could potentially happen, but overall I think the trade-off is worth it in a book with a high difficulty level, where things are challenging enough without asking the player to remember which neutral sounding word relates to which event when they think about what they might do differently on their next attempt. So yeah, great design work there. Perhaps the most interesting question about The House on Sentinel Hill to me is less about the formal structure of the book, which I think is strong, but a more nebulous question about how well it represents the Cthulhu Mythos and that particular kind of cosmic horror. Now, the answer to this one is complex. One thing it does well is preserving a sense of mystery and strangeness for a decent portion of the book's story. It's very coy about revealing exactly what's going on and the exact nature of the Mygo city, and a comprehensive vision of the background only emerges gradually, which is something I really like. If you're familiar with the Cthulhu Mythos, and honestly by this point who isn't, there's not a great many surprises, but Plowman does a really good job of retaining a sense of weirdness to the environments and the situations, while still providing enough structure that it doesn't feel as though you're flailing around in the dark. Your mission of getting home is nice and clear, but the world you explore is bizarre and rarely fully explained, and that's really nice. On the other hand, there's issues that come from attempting to do gaming in the Cthulhu Mythos. The very action of systematizing the mythos has a tendency to rob it of some of its power. The Mygo are strange and alien, right up until the point you have to give your first one a really good kicking, at which point it just becomes another monster. Things that are hinted at sooner or later, they do have to be explained in terms of the game systems. In the case of the combat system in particular, it makes the Mygo functionally identical to orcs in a dungeon chamber, and that is a problem. It's not a problem that's unique to The House on Sentinel Hill by any stretch of the imagination. It's something that applies to all gaming in the Cthulhu Mythos space. And part of the issue comes from the fact that a lot of modern derivative media relating to the mythos is more likely to be referencing Call of Cthulhu, the tabletop game, rather than the loose collection of stories by H.P. Lovecraft and his contemporaries, which form the actual myth pattern. Call of Cthulhu, as a role-playing game of a certain vintage, has a tendency to create a binary between the mythos and those who oppose the mythos, which reduces mythos entities to antagonists. Also, as an old-school role-playing game, there is an emphasis on overcoming challenges, which further characterises the mythos as something to be fought against and defeated on some level. This means that a lot of modern mythos material ends up reflecting the very pulp adventure sensibilities that H.P. Lovecraft himself professed to loathe, and that tends to detract from a core feature of cosmic horror, the idea of the insignificance of the individual when weighed against incomprehensible cosmic forces. A big reason why I love the mythos tales is that they're frequently infused with a sense of awe and fascination. That's something that's hard to maintain in a gaming setting, where awe is swiftly followed by trying to find something with which to blow the awesome thing up. The mythos has permeated a great deal of geek culture, but it's the mythos shorn of the very things that tend to make it most frightening and fascinating, which is one reason why I tend to be quite wary of derivative media in the Cthulhu mythos. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Call of Cthulhu as a pulp horror adventure game, and I've run Call of Cthulhu many times over the years and enjoyed it enormously, but it is not the Cthulhu mythos. The house on Sentinel Hill is a good representation of Call of Cthulhu style games, and it does get closer than many games I've played to representing something more authentically mythosy. It's still a miss, it ultimately ties up a little too neatly to feel like a cosmic horror story, but I do feel that the author is doing his best to go beyond presenting the monsters of the mythos as orcs with tentacles nailed to them. Yuggoth does feel like a truly alien setting at times, and being able to do that at all is a tremendous accomplishment, given the difficulty of doing it in this medium. I do think it might have benefited from employing a more ornate prose style to really sell the shuddersome horrors and nameless abominations that writhe and titter madly to themselves in the nighted gulfs of space, where the tired light of a sickly sun seeps across shrouded ziggurats and black basalt towers that squat above fathomless sepulchres, in which beings of foul and unguessable disposition conduct their incomprehensible experiments into the unknown reaches of the lower dimensions of space and time. But on the other hand, that might get wearisome over the course of a 585-section gamebook, and I think I'm definitely grateful that I didn't have to read that kind of thing out loud for the best part of an hour. In some ways, I think the issue is simply that gaming and the Cthulhu mythos are a bad fit, but even within that, there's better and worse ways to explore it, and the house on Sentinel Hill is one of the better attempts. Creeping round the alien city always feels strange and unsettling, and most of the issues I have broadly contribute to this being a better gaming experience. And ultimately, this is a book that's designed to be played, and sacrificing mythos authenticity to create something playable is a perfectly reasonable decision. One thing that did impress me is that Plowman is able to get a few NPC encounters into the action, which greatly adds to the variety. Again, I'm wary of spoilers, but you can come across various humans who have experienced the MIGO in some fashion or other, and it's a classic bit of Cthulhu Mythos action, but the author minds it very well for some differently weighted encounters. There's also plenty of variety to the other encounters without it straying too far from the core premise, which is a tricky thing to get right, but something else that helps make exploration feel enjoyable. Remembering that there's a haul of specimens and a nightmarish processing plant is much easier than remembering there's a specific monster behind an otherwise interchangeable dungeon door. I'm a really big fan of doing little mini biomes in your dungeon to give different areas of distinct identity, and this does a really good job of that. You sort of get different endings too, which is something I generally approve of, but here doesn't quite land because there's not much actual variety aside from one genuinely brilliant twist you can land on that's so good I think he should have just done away with the other options and gone with that as the conclusion to the adventure. In general, it's all about how many members of Edward's family you manage to save, which, given how late in the book you find them, doesn't do a particularly good job of encouraging replaying once you've actually got to the end. The scoring system doesn't work either. Scoring systems work best in books that are fairly easy to beat, to give you a reason to go back, but The House on Sentinel Hill is sufficiently tough that just beating it at all feels like an achievement. That's probably the only mechanic that's a straightforward swing and a miss though, which is a good average, and it's nothing that affects the overall experience. In general, the book is very professionally produced for a self-published offering. The artwork is strong and really adds to the atmosphere, and there's enough of it to feel like it's more than just window dressing. It makes me think I might need to try and source some art for my next book. Either that or just learn to draw properly. I used to be kind of okay at drawing. Maybe I could learn to draw properly. There's no obvious errors of spelling or grammar that I could see, though as a dyslexic that doesn't mean much. It would have benefited from an editor, but even then, the mistakes in language use aren't especially egregious and didn't spoil my enjoyment of the book. It feels like it fell through a time warp from the late 80s or early 90s, and honestly that is high praise coming from me. If you like horror game books and appreciate a classic design, then The House on Sentinel Hill is an easy book to recommend. Do be prepared to die a lot, though. That is all for this episode, except to thank another new patron on the way out who came on board while I was finishing up this podcast. Jake Wallin, thank you so much for your support. 2 new patrons has really given my January the lift it needed, and it's got me fired up for the next 12 months of gamebook-related fun. Anyone, patron or otherwise, can get hold of me by email at hjdoomretrofun, all one word, at gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky at hjdoom. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next fighting fantasy book in the series, which is Knights of Doom. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. I'm going back to frantically writing my gamebook, and I'll see you soon.